Enter the release code, or clear your locker by noon. Coulter Wynn's voice cut across the inspection bay at 5:38 Tuesday morning, sharp enough to rise above the whine of an impact driver and the metallic slap of a loose chain. 6 rebuilt water pumps stood beneath white lamps, their steel housings cold to the touch, their shipping caps already stacked beside them. The air smelled of cutting oil, scorched coffee, and rain carried in through the loading entrance. On the dispatch screen, all 6 units wore the same green label, ready for 4:15 pickup. Alina Serrano kept both hands away from the keyboard. I haven't inspected them. Coulter leaned one shoulder against the terminal. They passed the run test. Your part is the code. My part is confirming what I saw. Then see what everyone else sees and stop turning a small shop into a laboratory. Around them, the early crew slowed without fully stopping. A socket clicked once, then went silent. Someone lowered a chain hoist until its hook touched the concrete with a soft tap. Alina felt the room waiting for her to choose between the job she needed and the signature she could live with. She was 40, a single mother whose daughter, Celeste, was 20 and halfway through a community college program in medical billing. The component plant where Alina had worked quality control had closed 8 months earlier. Copper Mile Rebuild Cooperative, known around Cedarwick as the Foundry Lantern Workshop because of the fictional writer club that helped keep it open, was the first steady position she had found since. Rent was due Friday. Celeste's next tuition installment was due the following week. Coulter knew enough about her situation to understand that the threat did not need to be louder. He pointed at the 6 pumps. The carrier arrives at 4:15. If those units miss the truck, the regional contractor can shift the next 3 rebuilds elsewhere. We already delivered late twice. Nobody here gets protected from the consequences because they prefer a different checklist. Alina looked at the release field glowing on the screen. Her name would sit beside verified. Give me access to the inspection bay, and I'll check all 6. Coulter let out a tired laugh meant for the crew. That is why nobody lasts at this desk. Every new person believes caution is the same thing as competence. The remark landed because 3 people had left the verification position in 11 months. The story told around the shop was simple. The work was demanding, the schedule was unforgiving, and some people could not adapt. Alina had been there 9 days, too new to know what the others had objected to and too dependent on the paycheck to dismiss the pattern. Before she answered, 3 motorcycles rolled into the side lot, engines settling from a low rumble to silence. Jasper Lohman and 2 members of the Foundry Lantern Riders entered through the open personnel door, carrying road dust on their jackets and paper cups in their hands. The riders did not own the workers or command the floor. They helped operate the cooperative, handled maintenance contracts, and covered difficult transport runs when outside vendors refused them. Jasper did not step between Alina and Coulter. He looked first at the green release labels, then at the untouched keyboard. What exactly are you refusing? He asked. Nothing, Alina said. I'm offering to inspect the work. I'm refusing to certify what I wasn't allowed to inspect. Coulter folded his arms. The pumps ran 12 minutes each. Pressure held. Vibration stayed inside range. She wants to reopen finished work because that was how her old factory did things. Jasper's gaze moved past them to the inspection bay. A strip of orange composite showed behind the edge of a shadowed toolboard. How long would a proper check take? If the coupling locks are seated, less time than we've spent arguing. Coulter keyed, opened the bay. Fine. You have until 4:15 to prove you aren't the problem. If you stop the line without cause, your shift ends today. Alina pulled on her safety glasses. The plastic arms pressed against her temples. As she crossed the yellow line, the 6 lamps buzzed above the pumps and the dispatch clock changed to 5:46. She had less than 11 hours to protect her name, 6 machines, and a job no one before her had managed to keep. But if Coulter controlled the checklist, the release screen, and the story everyone already believed, what chance did one unverified objection have against a truck already scheduled to arrive? The misunderstanding surrounding Alina had been built before she ever stepped in a Copper Mile. Coulter had kept the cooperative moving through a winter when 2 mechanics quit, a supplier withdrew credit, and a burst pipe shut half the shop for 4 days. To the crew, that history mattered more than the caution of a woman who had been in the building for 9 days. Coulter never called Alina incompetent. He used a softer word, slow, and allowed everyone else to attach the insult. Big plants can afford 3 signatures on a bolt, he told the morning crew as Alina opened the first inspection panel. Here, customers pay us to return equipment, not admire it. Several workers nodded. Their hours depended on completed jobs, and the 6 pumps represented the largest order on the board. Alina understood why the argument worked. Her former plant used calibrated stations and traceable releases. Copper Mile relied on experience held inside people's heads. She respected that experience, but would not let it replace a check attached to her signature. Alina had asked on her 3rd day why the verification desk had been vacant so often. The answer had sounded harmless. The shop moved fast, some people preferred cleaner work, and not everyone could handle responsibility for final release. By Tuesday morning, she had begun to see the missing half of that explanation. The first verifier had been reassigned after insisting on witnessing a full load test instead of accepting a manager's summary. The second had lost weekend hours after placing 2 units on hold, then left for steadier work. The third had lasted less than a month before refusing to approve a batch completed before her shift began. None had been formally dismissed for raising a concern. Each had simply become known as difficult, inflexible, or too slow for a cooperative living on narrow margins. Coulter never needed to order anyone out. He could reduce access, move release authority, and let the crew's frustration finish the argument. No one lasted did not describe a naturally impossible job. It described a position where responsibility stayed with the verifier while control remained somewhere else. To the mechanics, Alina looked like the 4th outsider arriving with rules. To Coulter, she looked like someone who would eventually surrender for the same practical reasons as the others. Jasper remained near the bay entrance with the other riders, not blocking the aisle or standing close enough to make anyone feel surrounded. He watched the crew return to work and asked ordinary questions. Who had performed the run tests? Were the couplings new or rebuilt? When had the release process changed? Coulter answered without hesitation. The motors had run for 12 minutes. The couplings came from the current supplier. The visual inspection had been accepted for months. His certainty made Alina's pause look theatrical. She examined the first pump's housing, seals, mounting feet, wiring, pressure record, and vibration strip. Everything visible appeared clean. The white alignment marks across the coupling collar matched perfectly. A mechanic named Dario Pellin, who had assembled the coupling under Coulter's instructions, stood several yards away and pretended to organize sockets. His attention kept returning to Alina's hands. Behind the toolboard, the strip of orange showed again. Alina reached past a hanging torque wrench and lifted out a flat composite gauge with 6 narrow measuring teeth. Dust coated the handle, but the contact edges were clean. "What is this?" she asked. Coulter answered too quickly. "Old training piece. A vendor left it years ago." Alina turned it over. The molded code CX6 are ran along the underside. On the coupling collar, the same code rose in small lettering beside the manufacturer's mark. Coulter saw her comparing them. Generic family code. It proves nothing. That explanation sounded reasonable to workers who had already decided she was searching for a reason to delay them. Jasper did not challenge it. He set his coffee on a shelf and asked why an obsolete tool had 6 clean contact edges while the handle carried months of dust. No one answered. Alina placed the first tooth at the collar's upper locking point. It reached the molded stop. The second did the same, then the third, fourth, and fifth. The 6th stopped short by less than the width of a thumbnail. She removed the gauge, checked for debris, and tried again. The result did not change. Coulter took the tool from her and held it up so the crew could see. A warped piece of plastic. "That is the emergency? Try it yourself," Alina said. "I don't validate current work with abandoned tools." As he laid it down, she noticed a small open hexagon symbol beside the CX6 code and a bright contact line that ended halfway down the 6th tooth. If the tool had been untouched for years, Why did it carry a fresh pattern matching the failure she had just found? By 8:20, Coulter had transformed the deadline into a public test of Alina's usefulness. He wrote 4:15 pickup in thick black marker on the production board and added the value of the order beneath it. The number pulled eyes every time someone crossed the floor. Missing the carrier, he explained, could delay payment, reduce overtime, and give the regional contractor a reason to move future rebuilds elsewhere. None of those consequences was invented. That was what made the pressure effective. Alina completed the approved visual steps on the first pump and marked the coupling as unresolved. Coulter changed its status back to ready. Management override, he said, allowed after a successful run test. Jasper looked at the screen. The rule lets her record the concern. Yes. And lets you clear it. Yes. Then the only question is whether the concern is real. The room slowed again. Jasper's questions did not accuse anyone, but they removed the comfort of treating Alina's objection as a personality problem. Coulter reassigned Dario to install shipping caps and ordered another mechanic to stage the pumps near the loading lane. Alina moved to the second unit before it could be rolled away. Its pressure record was normal. The white alignment marks matched. She placed the orange gauge against the collar. 5 teeth reached home. The 6 stopped at the same point as before. Dario's hand froze around a rubber cap. Coulter stepped forward, took the gauge, and pressed the handle against the steel bench to show how composite could flex. 2 identical failures from one distorted tool prove the tool is wrong. Alina examined the reinforced rib behind the measuring teeth. The handle bent slightly, but the measuring section remained flat. Then place it on the collar yourself. No, why not? Because every minute I spend validating discarded equipment is another minute this shop loses. He turned toward the crew. The carrier does not care about theories. The customer does not pay us to debate old gauges. A senior mechanic named Brant Lucero asked what would happen to ours if the contract moved. Coulter answered that nobody could promise the current schedule would survive. The sentence shifted the room. Workers who had regarded the disagreement as inconvenient now saw Alina as a threat to their paychecks. One muttered that she had a factory pension to fall back on. She did not. Another said people who had been there 9 days should listen to people who had kept the doors open 9 years. Alina did not defend her finances or list her qualifications. She asked for 20 minutes to compare all 6 collars. Coulter gave her 10 and said any pump that passed his visual check would be released. Jasper asked Dario whether the same assembly instruction had been used on every unit. Dario glanced at Coulter before saying yes. Same parts shipment? Jasper asked. Yes. Same torque setting? Dario hesitated, then nodded. The hesitation mattered more than the answer. Alina looked along the row. Every collar carried the same CX, 6er code, and open hexagon symbol. Every white paint line had been drawn with the same careful hand. The marks were neat enough to reassure anyone who did not measure beneath them. At 9:05, dispatch confirmed the truck assignment. Coulter read the message aloud and told Alina she had already consumed a quarter of the working window. She tested the 3rd pump. Again, 5 teeth seated and the 6 stopped short. This time Dario turned away before anyone could study his face. Jasper noticed. He did not confront the mechanic. He simply asked when the orange gauge had last been used. Coulter said he did not know. Dario said nothing. Alina placed the tool flat beneath the inspection lamp. A faint, oily fingerprint crossed the dusty handle, too fresh to belong to something untouched for years. Someone had used it before her that morning. If Alina failed to make that fact visible before the carrier arrived, the shop record would show that her objection delayed work without cause, making another local quality job difficult to secure. She moved closer to Dario, but kept her voice low. I'm not asking you to choose a side. I'm asking whether you saw this same gap. Dario's jaw tightened. He glanced toward Coulter, then toward the board where 415 had become a warning to everyone. I installed what I was told to install, he said. It was not an answer, but it was enough to reveal fear. If Dario had already found the same failure, why had the tool been hidden and all 6 pumps marked ready? The orange gauge became the center of the dispute before lunch, but at first it seemed to support Coulter. He laid it on a clean cloth and invited the crew to study its faded handle, dusty lettering, and unmarked storage history. "This is what we were stopping for," he said. "Not a leak, not a failed pressure test, a neglected piece of composite that does not appear on our current checklist." In that framing, the tool looked unreliable. A valid instrument should have been labeled, logged, and stored where people could find it. This one had been pushed behind a board. Alina could not deny any of that. She also could not explain why 3 separate couplings had failed at the same position. Coulter offered what sounded like a reasonable compromise. She could enter tool discrepancy in an internal comment field and then complete the release. The note would preserve her concern without delaying the order. Alina studied the screen. The comment would remain inside Coppermile's maintenance file. It would not appear on the release certificate sent with the pumps. Her name, however, would still appear beside verified. "No," she said. "Then you are refusing an approved task." "I am refusing to mislabel an unresolved one." Coulter gave her until 1 o'clock to complete the visual sheets or be removed from the position. Jasper stayed near the far rail. He asked whether anyone had the cartons or instructions from the coupling shipment. Coulter said the packaging had been discarded after inventory. He asked whether purchase records showed the exact revision. Coulter replied that the part code was enough. "Then why does the current part carry the same open hexagon as the gauge?" Jasper asked. Coulter said manufacturers reuse symbols. Again, the answer was possible. Alina turned the tool beneath the inspection lamp. The 6 teeth were reinforced by a thicker rib, so the flex in the handle did not explain the repeated stop. Each tooth showed a narrow polished contact path. 5 paths reached the tips. The 6th ended halfway down. She measured the line against the 3 collars she had checked. The bright mark stopped exactly where the tool met resistance. Dario watched from the shipping table. When Coulter walked toward the office, Alina approached him without blocking his work. "Did you use this before I came in?" Dario's jaw tightened. "I installed what I was told to install. I'm not asking who to blame." "Then don't ask me on the floor." She stepped back. His fear was not the fear of someone who had secretly damaged equipment. It was the fear of someone who had seen a problem and been taught that speaking would make it his problem. At 11:46, Jasper called Inez Palomar, an independent safety engineer who had previously reviewed equipment for the cooperative. She was 2 towns away and could not promise an arrival time. Coulter objected to bringing in an outside engineer before anyone had demonstrated an actual defect. Jasper answered that the cooperative needed only one narrow question resolved: whether the CX-6R gauge remained applicable to the CX-6R collar. No one needed to accuse anyone to answer it. The lunch buzzer sounded, but few workers left. The order value and pickup time remained on the board. Coulter returned to the bench, picked up the gauge, and said he would place it in scrap evaluation after the shift. Alina extended her hand. "Not until the question is answered." He looked at Jasper, perhaps expecting the writer to order her aside. Jasper only said, "Leave the disputed tool where both parties can see it." Coulter set it down. As he did, Dario moved close enough to speak without raising his voice. "That polish mark wasn't there when the shipment arrived," he told Alina. "The teeth were clean then." Before she could ask more, he walked away. The detail changed the question. The gauge had not merely been used. It had been used recently enough to create 6 fresh contact paths. Alina checked the other collars without applying the tool and noticed a thin crescent of white paint missing at the 6th position on each one, as if the same edge had brushed them before the shipping marks dried. The gauge now seemed to prove 2 opposite stories at once. To Coulter, it was a neglected object unworthy of stopping a contract. To Alina, its fresh were suggested someone had already tested the parts and chosen silence. If the tool had shown the same failure earlier, whose decision had turned that warning into an obsolete piece of plastic? Inez Palomar arrived at 12:37, carrying no dramatic case. Only a laptop, safety glasses, a steel rule, and the controlled impatience of someone called into an argument that should have been a procedure. She asked to see the orange gauge before hearing either version of events. Coulter repeated that it was an obsolete training piece. Inez turned it over, read CX, 6R, and found the open hexagon symbol. "This is the post-installation seating gauge for the revised collar," she said. Her sentence did not prove the pumps unsafe, but it destroyed the claim that Alina had invented a meaningless test. Inez opened the supplier's current service bulletin on her laptop. The same orange tool appeared beside the same symbol. All 6 teeth had to reach their molded stops after torque and before extended load operation. Coulter shifted his argument without hesitation. Coppermile had run each pump for 12 minutes. Pressure had held, temperature had remained stable, and vibration had stayed inside the acceptable band. Inez agreed that those results mattered. Then she explained what they did not prove. An internal retaining ring seated unevenly could survive a short shop run and move only after hours under sustained load. The gauge existed because the defect was difficult to see once the collar was painted. Jasper asked where the pumps were going. Coulter said the work order carried the customer code, but Alina had seen only the abbreviated project reference. Inez expanded the contract record. The 6 units were assigned to backup water systems at Cedarwick's adult emergency shelters, buildings used when heat waves, winter outages, or utility failures displaced residents. The revelation changed the moral weight of the room without turning the equipment into a disaster waiting to happen. No pump had failed. No shelter was currently depending on them. But the machines were being rebuilt precisely because they might someday need to run for many continuous hours when ordinary systems were unavailable. So the question is not whether they ran for 12 minutes, Alina said. It is whether we completed the check designed for the way they may actually be used. Inez nodded. She then opened the cooperative's earlier work package and found a second discrepancy. The original coupling stage required 2-person confirmation, 1 assembler and 1 verifier. 3 months earlier, that line had been replaced with manager visual release after successful run test. The change carried Coulter's authorization. He did not deny it. After 2 late deliveries, he explained, the contractor had warned Coppermile that another missed window could cost future orders. The 2-person step created bottlenecks whenever only 1 qualified verifier was present. "I removed duplication," he said. "I did not remove safety." Inez replied that she had not yet determined whether the shortened process caused a defect. The supplier bulletin confirmed the gauge was required, but the reason all 3 tested collars stopped at the same point was still unknown. Jasper asked who had assembled them. Dario went pale. Before his name could become the room's answer, Alina said, "Check the instruction before you choose a person to blame." The sentence cost her an easy way to protect herself. If Dario had made a simple installation mistake, Coulter's system might still look sound, and Alina could be portrayed as the person who found it. Instead, she insisted on examining the cause. That protection gave Dario enough room to speak. He said Coulter had instructed him to torque the collars, align the white marks, and skip the orange gauge because it slowed shipping. Early that morning, worried by the revised parts, Dario had tested 1 collar on his own. The 6th stopped. He showed Coulter, who told him the tool was outdated and ordered him to finish the shipping caps. Dario returned it behind the board because he feared being blamed for delaying the order. The room's question changed. It was no longer, is Alina too cautious? Or even did Dario assemble the collars badly? The real problem was a process that taught workers to treat visible completion as verified completion. Yet one essential fact remained unknown: whether the repeated failure came from a harmless tolerance difference, an incorrect assembly instruction, or a genuine seating error. With the carrier now expected earlier than planned, the group needed to stop arguing about personalities and identify the exact cause. Could they protect the shelters, preserve a legitimate contract, and correct the process without sacrificing another worker to the same empty desk? Jasper treated the next 90 minutes like ordinary shop work, not a rescue. He asked one rider to call the carrier and confirm the latest time a release hold could be placed without sending the driver into the yard unnecessarily. Another copied the key times on the whiteboard. 5:38 request for Alina's code, 9:05 truck assignment, 12:37 Inez's arrival, for 15 scheduled pickup. Jasper asked Dario to demonstrate the assembly sequence exactly as he had been taught. Inez compared each step with the supplier bulletin. Alina checked all 6 collar codes and confirmed they came from the same revised shipment. No one searched lockers, seized phones, or stood in Coulter's path. The personnel door remained open. Coulter continued moving between the office, production floor, and loading lane as he chose. The help was useful because it was procedural. Dario showed that he had cleaned each shaft, installed the internal ring, threaded the collar, applied the specified torque, and painted the alignment mark. Inez asked where the ring's orientation had been verified. Dario pointed to a diagram taped inside the assembly cabinet. The drawing showed the older collar revision, whose internal shoulder was symmetrical. The revised CX-6R collar used a stepped shoulder, but the shop copy did not show it. That did not yet prove the ring had been installed incorrectly. It explained why 6 careful assemblies might share the same hidden weakness. Jasper called the supplier's technical desk on speaker. Without describing the conflict, he read the part code and asked 3 narrow questions. Was the orange gauge current? Did all 6 positions have to seat? Could a successful 12-minute run replace the seating check? The technician answered yes, and no. A single short point required the collar to be loosened, the ring position inspected, and the assembly repeated. The technician also confirmed that the revised instruction had been included digitally with the shipment. Coulter argued that Coppermile had never received it. Inez checked the purchasing account and found that the update had been sent to the general shop address 6 weeks earlier. The message had been opened, but the attachment had not been added to the assembly cabinet. Who opened it could not be established from the shop terminal, and Jasper refused to turn the search into an accusation. The immediate problem was enough. Inez proposed a fair test. Inspect all 6 pumps with the gauge. Repeat every failed result with a second person. Verify the tool dimensions against the supplier specification, and open one coupling only if the failure repeated. If the internal ring was correctly seated, the shop would have evidence that the gauge or bulletin did not fit the actual shipment. If it was wrong, they would have a specific repair instead of a general suspicion. Coulter objected that the procedure could consume the entire shipping window. Jasper asked whether any shorter method could answer the same question. Coulter offered the existing run tests. Inez reminded him that the supplier explicitly said those tests could not substitute for the seating check. Alina then offered Coulter a private exit. She would test the pumps with him before the crew gathered. If all 6 passed, she would withdraw her objection and accept whatever employment decision followed. If one failed, Coulter could place the hold himself and describe it as a routine verification delay. He would not have to be publicly cornered or personally accused. Coulter declined. If I reward a 9-day employee for overruling the manager, he said, I will never run this floor again. The answer revealed that control, not merely time, had become part of the conflict. At 2:18, dispatch called back. The driver had finished an earlier route and would reach the industrial road at 3:55, 20 minutes sooner than the posted deadline. The carrier could wait only 10 minutes before moving to another pickup. Jasper updated the whiteboard. Alina counted the remaining time and understood the new risk. Even if the evidence supported her, a slow test could make her appear responsible for the very contract loss Coulter had predicted. Worse, the cooperative's rules allowed him to print release labels unless an operations representative placed a formal hold. Jasper had not done so yet because the cause remained unproven. As the crew prepared the open test bay, one more obstacle appeared. The inspection bench could hold only 1 pump at a time, and moving each unit safely required 2 workers and the overhead hoist. If the sequence stalled even once, the truck could arrive before the 6th machine was tested. If Coulter acted first, would 6 unresolved machines leave the yard while everyone was still arranging the facts? At 3:10, Coulter nearly won because his argument was not selfish on its face. He gathered the crew beside the production board and spoke without anger. The 6 pumps had passed pressure and vibration tests. No engineer had declared them defective. The regional contractor had already warned Coppermile about late delivery, and a missed pickup could cost future work. If that happened, reduced hours would fall on everyone, not only the person who raised the objection. Workers with mortgages, medical payments, and unstable schedules heard a reason to accept uncertainty. Alina heard it too. Coulter removed her access to the verification terminal and assigned release authority to himself. He told her she could finish the shift in inventory or leave with pay for the hours already worked. Her safety glasses felt suddenly heavy. Walking away would keep her name off the certificate because she had never entered the code. Staying might cost her the job anyway, while convincing the crew that she valued a measuring tool more than their livelihoods. She thought of Celeste's tuition installment and the rent envelope on her kitchen counter. Leaving would not create a dramatic collapse. That was what made the choice difficult. The shop would open again Wednesday. Coulter would assign another name to the release desk. The crew would remember that Alina had delayed 6 pumps and walked out before the carrier arrived. By the time she applied elsewhere, the story could be reduced to one sentence. She could not adapt to a small operation. She would postpone Celeste's payment, ask the landlord for 4 extra days, and begin another round of applications in a town where industrial employers called one another. None of those losses would prove she had been wrong. They would only make being right more expensive. She also knew that staying for the wrong reason could strip away the dignity she was trying to protect. She did not owe Coppermile endless sacrifice. She did not need to become the woman who absorbed every insult simply because a paycheck mattered. The line she chose was narrower. She would remain only long enough to prevent her objection from being rewritten as laziness. After that, the shop could keep her, dismiss her, or replace her, but it would have to make the decision in front of the unanswered test. Alina placed her safety glasses on the bench and walked toward the personnel door. No one blocked her. Jasper did not call her back or turn her departure into a test of courage. At the edge of the bay, she passed the orange gauge. 6 polished contact paths caught the inspection lamps. 5 reached the ends. 1 stopped short. The pattern was no longer only evidence of a technical question. It showed how easily 5 acceptable points could be used to ignore the 6th. She returned to the terminal area and put her glasses back on. "I won't enter the code," she said, "and I won't leave while my objection is being described as refusal to work. I offer to inspect all 6. I'm still offering." Coulter replied that he no longer needed her authorization. "That is true," Jasper said. "But the cooperative rule allows an operations representative to place a temporary verification hold when a current supplier requirement is disputed." He had waited because he did not want club status used as a substitute for evidence. Now Inez had confirmed the requirement. The supplier had confirmed all 6 seating points, and the revised instruction had not reached the assembly cabinet. Jasper entered a hold expiring at 4:05, 10 minutes before the original deadline, and long enough for the repeated test Inez proposed. The hold did not lock a gate, stop anyone from leaving, or prevent Coulter from speaking to dispatch. It only stopped the release labels from printing until the question was answered. Coulter accused Jasper of allowing one employee to endanger the cooperative. Jasper answered that the hold endangered nothing a valid test could not restore. If the pumps passed, the labels could still print before the driver's waiting period ended. If they failed, the contract was already at risk whether the shop admitted it or not. Alina offered Coulter one final private correction. If machines passed, she would withdraw her objection. If one failed, he could place the shipping hold himself. Coulter refused. "If we perform this in front of everyone, we turn one employee's doubt into a verdict." "No," Alina replied. "We turn it into a result." At 3:34, the carrier reported that it was 12 minutes away. Which mattered more to Coulter now, the contract he claimed to protect or the authority he feared losing? At 3:42, the inspection bay looked less like a confrontation than a lesson arranged with unusual care. The 6 pumps stood in a straight line beneath the white lamps, shipping caps removed and coupling collars exposed. The main aisle remained clear. The personnel door stayed open. The foundry lantern riders stood against the far rail with the mechanics, leaving open space around Alina, Coulter, Dario, and Inez. No one formed a wall around anyone. Outside, The carrier's diesel could already be heard turning from the industrial road toward Copper Mile. Jasper wrote no accusation on the whiteboard. He listed only the facts everyone had confirmed. 538 release code requested. 6 pumps. CX. 6 are revised collars. 6 seating points per collar. Current supplier gauge required. 2-person confirmation omitted from the shop process. 3:55 carrier arrival. 4:05 expiration of the temporary hold. 4:15 scheduled pickup. Inez placed the orange gauge in the center of the inspection bench. She explained the method once. The tool had to be held flat. No force beyond steady hand pressure was allowed. Each tooth either reached its molded stop or it did not. A second person would repeat every failed result. If 2 operators disagreed, the gauge would be checked against the supplier dimensions before any conclusion was drawn. The structure removed performance from the test. Alina took the first pump. The gauge settled at 5 points and stopped at the 6th. She stepped away. Dario repeated the test without being prompted, and the same narrow gap remained. Inez recorded only the result. No speech, no reaction. For the second pump, Hector Blaine followed her instructions while Coulter watched from the terminal. The 6 points stopped again. Inez checked it herself and obtained the same fit. On the third unit, she measured the gauge before testing, confirming that its width and tooth spacing remained within the supplier's tolerance. The tool passed. The collar did not. By then, the truck had entered the loading area, its engine idling beyond the open bay. Pump 4 went to Brant Lucero, one of the mechanics who had defended Coulter's decision. He cleaned the collar, aligned the marks, and tried twice. Both attempts ended at the 6th point. Another senior mechanic tested Pump 5. Same stop, same distance, same bright line on the orange tooth. The repetition changed the room more effectively than accusation could have. Each new operator removed another possible excuse. Not Alina's grip, not Dario's nerves, not Inez's interpretation, not the gauge's dimensions. The overhead hoist then stalled halfway between pumps 5 and 6, forcing Hector and Brant to lower the final unit by hand crank. The delay consumed 2 minutes and brought the hold closer to expiration. No one used the problem to rush the test. Jasper called out the time, asked whether the path remained safe, and waited until the pump rested squarely on the bench. At 3:52, 5 machines had produced one result in 5 different pairs of hands. Only the last pump remained, and Inez placed the gauge in front of Coulter. He did not take it immediately. The temporary hold had 13 minutes left. The driver had 9 minutes before dispatch required him to leave for another pickup. Coulter looked at the crew, perhaps searching for anger he could resist or a threat he could condemn. There was none. The riders had supplied time, witnesses, calls, and a clear floor. Alina had supplied a refusal and a repeatable question. The evidence now waited without demanding a particular emotion from him. Jasper said, "No one here needs you to agree with Alina. We need you to perform the same check everyone else performed." Coulter finally lifted the gauge. He faced the 6 collar with every exit open and every fact visible. When a man who had called the tool obsolete pressed it against the final machine, would the last tooth release the shipment or close the only argument he had left? Coulter held the orange gauge flat against the 6 collar and pressed with both thumbs. 5 teeth reached their molded stops. The 6 stopped at the same polished line. He removed the tool, rotated it so a different tooth met the disputed position, and tried again. The failure stayed with the collar, not the gauge. Inez asked one question. "Can you certify that this coupling passed the required 6-point seating check?" Coulter looked at the whiteboard, the idling truck, and the 5 people who had already obtained the same result. "No," he said. Jasper did not ask for an apology or announce that Alina had won. He gave Coulter the 2 choices the evidence allowed. Coulter could place the shipping hold himself, or he could authorize release after personally confirming a failed required check. No one had taken away his phone, his office, or his ability to leave. What had disappeared was the space where responsibility could be transferred to Alina, Dario, an obsolete tool story, or the pressure of the deadline. At 4:02, Coulter called dispatch. "Hold all 6 units," he said. "Verification incomplete. Cancel today's pickup." The driver pulled away through the open lane. At 4:15, the original deadline passed with all 6 pumps still beneath the inspection lamps. Inez authorized one coupling to be opened. Dario loosened it while Alina observed. The revised internal retaining ring had settled against the wrong shoulder, exactly where the 6th gauge point indicated. The old assembly diagram in the cabinet had made the error repeatable across the shipment. The white alignment marks were accurate relative to the wrong internal position. 5 acceptable points had hidden one incomplete seat. The cause did not excuse Coulter's decision to dismiss the gauge, but it proved that Dario had not been careless. He had followed the instruction available to him. Before the crew left, Coulter removed his own manager override initials from the release queue and signed the corrective hold. He also restored the names of the 3 former verifiers to the internal review list, not as failed employees, but as workers whose earlier objections now required examination. The cooperative's board suspended his independent approval authority, required recertification, and ordered a review of earlier pumps fitted with 6 or collars. He remained employed because he had stopped the shipment before release and agreed to repair the process, but every critical approval would now require a second verifier. Jasper offered Alina a hardship payment for the day she had spent under improper pressure. She declined. "Pay me for the responsibility the shop needs performed," she said. She proposed a formal verification lead position, wages matching that duty, protected authority to place a documented test hold, and a rule that no worker could be required to certify a step not personally observed. She also required that an assembler raising a technical concern could not lose hours merely because the concern delayed a schedule. The cooperative accepted those terms as operating policy, not charity. 24 hours and 34 minutes after Coulter's first demand, at 6:12 Wednesday morning, a second inspection bench stood opposite the first. Between them, Coulter tightened the final screws on a fixed holder for the orange 6-point gauge, while Inez checked that both workers could reach it. The act did not erase what he had done. It was simply the first repair he made to the system instead of its appearance. Dario reseated the first coupling using the revised diagram. He checked 3 positions, and Alina checked the other 3. Then they exchanged sides and repeated the full 6-point fit together. Every tooth reached home. The pump completed an extended run and returned to the benches for final confirmation. Only then did Alina enter the release code. Jasper handed her the new work schedule and salary notice without calling her brave or thanking her for saving anyone. The Foundry Lantern riders returned to their own jobs. Coulter began, identifying earlier units that required review. Brant replaced the outdated diagram in the assembly cabinet, while Hector added the supplier revision number to the shift board so the next crew would know exactly which instruction governed the work. The 3 people who had left the verification desk could not be given back the hours or confidence they had lost, but the position they had been blamed for abandoning no longer carried responsibility without authority. Alina had not remained because desperation made her willing to endure anything. She stayed because walking away at 3:10 would have allowed someone else to attach a false decision to her name. The first corrected pump rolled towards shipping, and the orange gauge remained between the 2 benches, visible from both sides. It was no longer a forgotten training piece or a weapon in an argument. It was simply a tool that required 2 people to look at the same 6 points before either of them could say the work was done. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more biker stories. This is a fictional story created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real people, places, organizations, clubs, or events is purely coincidental.